Due to the unauthorized driveway gate, the board has levied a severe fine of $12,000, effective immediately.
The entire room went silent the moment I placed the folder on the table. Across from me, Richard Coleman, the president of our HOA, was standing behind the microphone with his face turning red, his jaw tight, and his hand gripping the edge of the podium like he was trying not to throw it at me. 10 minutes earlier, he had told the whole neighborhood that I owed the association $12,000 in fines because I had installed an unauthorized gate at the end of my driveway. Then he looked straight at me and said, in front of everyone, that if I did not remove it and pay the full amount within 10 days, the HOA would move forward with a lien against my house. People started whispering. A few neighbors stared at me like I had done something shameful. Someone in the back raised a phone and began recording. Richard leaned closer to the microphone and said I was making a mockery of the rules, that homeowners like me were the reason communities fell apart. I did not shout back. I did not call him a liar. I just opened my laptop, plugged in a small USB drive, and waited for the projector screen behind him to flicker on. Richard saw the first email before anyone else did. His expression changed so fast that even the people in the front row noticed. The anger drained out of his face and was replaced by something colder: panic. On the screen was the architectural request I had submitted months earlier. The gate design, the measurements, the color sample, the setback from the sidewalk, and the exact location at the entrance to my private driveway. Under it was the reply I had received from the HOA president himself, from Richard Coleman, HOA president, approved as submitted. The room shifted, chairs creaked, someone whispered, "Wait, he approved it?" Richard slammed his palm on the table so hard the microphone squealed. He pointed at me and said that email was being taken out of context, that I had no right to embarrass the board in public, and that this meeting was not a courtroom. But that was exactly the problem for him, because I had not brought just one email. I had brought the full chain. I had brought the bylaws. I had brought the meeting minutes. I had brought county records showing the gate did not need a permit, and I had brought security footage of Richard standing outside my house, laughing as he told another board member he was going to make an example out of me. That was the moment the fine stopped being about a gate. It became about a president who thought the HOA was his personal kingdom, and before that meeting ended, the $12,000 fine would be gone. The board would be forced to explain every illegal step they had taken, and Richard Coleman would realize that the email he thought he could deny was the same email that was about to cost him his position. Before all of that happened, I was not someone who went looking for trouble with the HOA. I was the kind of homeowner who paid dues on time, kept the grass trimmed, brought the trash cans in before sunset, and nodded politely at board members, even when they acted like the sidewalk belonged to them personally. My wife and I had bought that house after years of saving, budgeting, and saying no to vacations we could not afford. It was not a mansion. It was not the biggest place in the neighborhood, but it was ours, and after years of renting apartments with thin walls and parking lots full of strangers, that word meant something. The house sat near the curve of a quiet suburban street, with a long driveway running along the side and opening into the backyard. That driveway was one of the reasons we bought the place. It gave us privacy, room for my truck, space for deliveries, and a safe path for our daughter to ride her little scooter while we worked in the yard. On paper, it was just concrete. To us, it was part of the peace we had worked so hard to build. But over time, that driveway became a shortcut for everyone else. Delivery drivers used it to turn around. Teenagers cut through it on bikes. One neighbor's guests kept backing halfway up it during weekend parties. The worst moment came one afternoon when my daughter was riding near the garage and a landscaping truck reversed into our driveway without warning. Nothing happened to her, but only because my wife shouted in time. After that, I could not look at the open driveway the same way again. So I decided to install a gate. Not a massive iron wall, not some ugly industrial barrier, just a tasteful, low driveway gate that matched the trim of the house and stayed well within the community's design rules. I read the HOA covenants twice. I downloaded the architectural request form. I included the measurements, the material, the color, the distance from the sidewalk, and a photo mock-up showing exactly how it would look from the street. I did everything the way a responsible homeowner is supposed to do it. At the time, Richard Coleman seemed helpful. He had been HOA president for nearly 5 years, and most people treated him like the unofficial mayor of the neighborhood. He had the polished smile, the tucked-in polo shirt, the golf cart with the HOA logo, and the habit of speaking to adults like they were students in detention. But when I sent him the gate request, he replied quickly. He confirmed that the design looked acceptable. He said the location would not block any common area. Then he wrote the words that later became the center of the entire fight. Approved as submitted. I saved the email without thinking much about it. I saved everything, really, because that was just how I handled paperwork. Mortgage documents, insurance policies, contractor invoices, HOA notices, permit questions. I kept folders for all of it. At the time, it felt boring. Later, it became the only reason Richard could not bury me under a fake violation. The gate was installed 2 weeks later. It looked better than I expected. It did not block the sidewalk. It did not cross the property line. It did not violate the height rule. It simply made our home feel like ours again. My wife loved it. My daughter called it our castle gate, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could let her play near the garage without watching every passing vehicle like it was a threat. That is why this mattered so much. It was never about showing off. It was never about challenging the HOA. It was about safety, privacy, and the basic right to protect the property we had paid for. And for anyone watching who has ever dealt with an HOA that seemed more interested in control than fairness, you already know how quickly a small home improvement can turn into a nightmare. Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I still want to know what other homeowners would have done the moment a board president tried to rewrite his own approval. For almost a month, nothing happened. The gate stood there quietly. Neighbors complimented it. Delivery drivers stopped using my driveway as a turnaround. My daughter played outside without my stomach twisting every time a truck came down the street. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, I opened my mailbox and found a white envelope from the HOA. Inside was a violation notice stating that my gate had never been approved. The first violation notice looked so ridiculous that I almost laughed when I read it. It claimed my driveway gate was an unapproved exterior modification that disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood. It said I had failed to obtain proper authorization from the architectural committee, and it ordered me to remove the gate within 7 days or face daily fines. At the bottom, in bold letters, was a warning that continued non-compliance could result in legal action, collection fees, and a lien against my property. I stood in my kitchen with that letter in my hand, looking through the window at the gate Richard himself had approved. At first, I honestly believed it had to be a clerical mistake. Maybe the management company had not updated the file. Maybe someone on the architectural committee had not seen the email. Maybe Richard had forgotten that he had already replied. So I scanned the notice, attached his approval email, and sent a calm response asking them to correct the record. 2 days later, Richard answered. His message was short, cold, and careful. He wrote that his previous email had only been an informal comment, not a formal board approval. He said the final decision rested with the full HOA board, and since no final approval had been issued, the gate was a violation. That was the first time I felt the ground shift under me, because the email had not sounded informal. The form had been complete. The design had been submitted exactly the way the HOA required, and Richard had not written that the gate looked acceptable pending review. He had not written that the board would discuss it later. He had written approved as submitted, but once Richard decided to deny that, the HOA machine started moving. The first fine was $250. Then another $250 appeared 3 days later. Then the notice changed from a warning to a continuing violation. Every time I opened my mailbox, there was another envelope with the HOA logo in the corner, each one more threatening than the last. The tone went from administrative to personal, as if I had insulted the entire neighborhood by refusing to rip out something I had been told I could build. Richard made sure everyone saw it. He started driving past my house in his HOA golf cart almost every evening. He would slow down at the end of the driveway, stop in front of the gate, and take pictures with his phone. Sometimes he would bring another board member with him and point toward the gate like it was evidence at a crime scene. He never stepped onto my property, but he got close enough to make the message clear. He wanted me to feel watched. One Saturday morning, while I was washing my truck, he stopped at the curb and stared at the gate for a long moment before telling me I was making things harder than they needed to be. His voice was calm, but it had that polished arrogance people use when they know others are listening. He said the community had standards, the board had authority, and homeowners could not just do whatever they wanted because they found one email they liked. A neighbor across the street was pretending to water his lawn while clearly listening to every word. Richard knew it. That was why he raised his voice just enough for the block to hear. He said I was setting a bad example. He said if the board let me get away with this, every homeowner would start ignoring the rules. Then he told me the fines would continue until I removed the gate and paid what I owed. I remember standing there with soap still running down the side of my truck, feeling my face get hot, but forcing myself not to react the way he wanted. Richard was not just enforcing a rule, he was performing authority. He wanted an audience. He wanted me angry. He wanted me to say something he could twist into proof that I was unreasonable. So I said nothing that could help him. By the end of the second week, the fines had passed $2,000. By the end of the month, they were over $5,000. Then the HOA added administrative fees, legal review fees, and collection costs that no one had explained. The balance kept growing like a trap, closing around my house. My wife stopped sleeping well. She would sit at the kitchen table after our daughter went to bed, reading the notices over and over, asking if they could really put a lien on our home over a gate. I told her I did not think they could do it legally, but the truth was, I was scared too. We had worked too hard for that house. We had stretched every dollar to buy it. The idea that one man with a grudge and a title could threaten our home over his own approval made me feel sick. Then came the certified letter. It was thicker than the others. Inside was a final demand stating that the total amount owed was $12,000. It claimed I had willfully refused to comply with HOA rules, ignored repeated notices, and forced the association to prepare for enforcement action. It gave me 10 days to remove the gate and pay the full balance. If I failed, the letter said the HOA would pursue all remedies available under the governing documents, including placing a lien against my property. Richard's signature was at the bottom. That same evening, he drove by again. This time, he did not even pretend to inspect anything. He stopped his golf cart in the street, looked straight at me from behind the windshield, and gave a small smile. It was not the smile of someone enforcing neighborhood standards. It was the smile of someone who thought he had already won. That was when something changed in me. Until then, I had been trying to reason with the HOA. I had been sending polite emails, attaching documents, asking for clarification, and assuming that if I showed them the approval, someone would correct the mistake. But Richard was not mistaken. He knew exactly what he had written. He knew exactly what he was denying, and he was counting on the fines becoming so frightening that I would give up, remove the gate, and let him rewrite the truth. The next morning, I created a new folder on my computer. I named it HOA Gate Dispute. Then I started saving everything. The folder on my computer started with only 3 files. The first was Richard's approval email. The second was the violation notice. The third was the certified letter threatening a lien against my house. But by the end of that week, the folder had become something else entirely. It became a timeline. It became a record. It became the one thing Richard had not expected me to build, a case. I stopped answering the HOA emotionally. Every instinct in me wanted to write back and accuse Richard of lying, bullying, and abusing his position, but I knew that was exactly what he wanted. He wanted anger. He wanted messy emails. He wanted one sentence he could pull out of context and show the board as proof that I was hostile. So I kept every response short, calm, and factual. I asked for copies of the rule I had violated. I asked for the date of the board vote. I asked for the hearing notice required under the bylaws. I asked for the official architectural committee decision denying my gate. The answers never came clearly. Instead, the management company sent vague paragraphs about community standards and board discretion. Richard sent nothing useful at all. The more they avoided my questions, the more obvious it became that the fine was not standing on rules. It was standing on intimidation. That was when I printed the HOA governing documents and sat at the kitchen table with a yellow highlighter until almost 2 a.m. I read the CC&Rs, the architectural guidelines, the enforcement policy, and every amendment I could find on the HOA website. Most of it was dry, repetitive, and written in the kind of language that makes normal people give up after 2 pages. But buried in the architectural section was the first important clause. Any exterior modification request submitted with complete plans had to receive a written approval, written denial, or written request for additional information within 30 days. If the association failed to respond in that time, the request could be considered approved. My request had not only received a response within 30 days, it had received a written approval from the HOA president. Then I found the second clause. Before fines could be imposed, the homeowner had to receive written notice of the alleged violation and an opportunity for a hearing before the board. Not after the fines started, not after thousands of dollars had already been added. Before. I had never been offered a hearing. That one detail changed the way I looked at every envelope they had sent. The notices were not just aggressive, they were procedurally wrong. The next morning, I called the county permit office. I expected a long process, but the woman who answered transferred me to a building department employee who knew exactly what kind of gate I was describing. I gave him the height, the location, the setback from the sidewalk, and the fact that it was not motorized. He explained that a simple private driveway gate like mine did not require a county building permit as long as it did not block public right-of-way, exceed the height limit, or involve electrical work. I wrote down the date, the time, the department, and the name of the employee. Then I sent a public records request for any permit requirement or violation complaint connected to my address. A few days later, the response came back clean. There was no county violation, no permit issue, no complaint from any inspector. So the gate was not illegal under county rules, it was not blocking public property, it was not outside the approved design. The only problem was Richard. After that, I moved to the HOA records. I requested the architectural committee minutes from the month I submitted the gate application. The management company delayed for several days, then sent a scanned packet so blurry it looked like it had been copied from a copy of a copy. But one page was clear enough. My address appeared in a short list of architectural submissions. Next to it was a note stating that the homeowner had submitted a complete gate package and that President Coleman had confirmed the design was acceptable. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Richard had not forgotten. The board had not been unaware. My gate had been discussed, recorded, and acknowledged before it was built. That meant the later claim that no approval existed was not just weak, it was false. Then I checked my security cameras. At first, I was only looking for the dates Richard had stopped in front of my house. I found several clips of his golf cart slowing at the curb while he took photos of the gate. That alone did not prove much. But one clip from the Saturday after the second fine caught something different. Richard had stopped with another board member sitting beside him. My driveway camera picked up their voices faintly but clearly enough. Richard pointed toward my gate, laughed, and said he was going to make an example out of me before anyone else in the neighborhood got ideas. I played that clip 3 times without moving. That was not enforcement, that was personal. By then, my wife had started helping me organize everything. She created a spreadsheet with columns for dates, documents, senders, amounts, and notes. Every fine went into the sheet. Every email went into the sheet. Every unanswered request went into the sheet. We saved screenshots, PDFs, envelopes, certified mail receipts, and video files on 2 separate drives. We were not trying to be dramatic. We were trying to make sure nothing disappeared. When the balance hit $12,000, I knew I needed a lawyer. I found an attorney who handled HOA disputes and property matters. I sent him the approval email, the violation notices, the bylaws, the meeting minutes, the county permit response, and the security footage. I expected him to tell me this would be expensive and complicated. Instead, after reviewing the documents, he focused on one question more than anything else. He wanted to know whether the HOA had ever given me a hearing before imposing the fines. When I told him no, he went quiet for a moment. Then he explained that the HOA had a serious problem. They had approved the gate in writing, reversed themselves without a proper basis, imposed escalating fines without following their own due process rules, and allowed the same president who approved the project to lead the punishment against it. A few days later, the attorney sent a formal records demand to the HOA. He asked for the complete violation file, all board votes related to my gate, all hearing notices, all architectural decisions, all internal emails mentioning my address, and the legal basis for the $12,000 balance. The HOA had 10 business days to respond. For the first time since the notices began, Richard stopped driving by my house. When the records finally arrived, the packet was thick, but the truth inside it was thin. There were copies of my emails, copies of the fines, copies of the violation notices, copies of Richard's complaints about the gate, but there was no hearing notice, no signed denial, no formal board vote approving the $12,000 fine, no document showing that the architectural approval had ever been revoked. The absence was louder than anything they could have written. My attorney reviewed the packet, tapped the missing sections with his pen, and made it clear that Richard had not just overplayed his hand. He had built the entire case against me on a hole in the HOA's own paperwork. That was when the fight changed. Until then, Richard had treated me like a homeowner begging for mercy. But now I had the approval, the bylaws, the county response, the minutes, the video, and the missing records. He had a title, a temper, and a fine he could not prove. And for the first time, I was not afraid of the next HOA meeting. I was ready for it. The legal twist did not come from some hidden law no one had heard of. It came from Richard's own email. After my attorney reviewed the HOA's incomplete records, he asked me to send the original email file, not just a printed copy, not just a screenshot, but the actual message, with the full header and metadata attached. I had no idea why that mattered at first. To me, the important part was already obvious. Richard had written approved as submitted. But my attorney wanted to see everything around that sentence: the sender, the timestamp, the attachments, the subject line, the message thread, and whether the approval had been sent in direct response to my full architectural package. So I went back into my email archive and found the original thread. That was when the story became even worse for Richard. The approval was not a casual comment. It was not a friendly opinion. It was a direct reply to the complete architectural request form, with the gate drawings, color sample, material description, height measurement, and placement diagram attached underneath it. The subject line included the words "architectural request." Richard had replied from his official HOA email account. He had copied the management company, and in the message before the approval, he had even suggested one small design change so the gate would better match the neighborhood entrance signs. I had followed that suggestion exactly. That meant Richard had not merely approved the gate, he had shaped the final version of it. When my attorney saw that, he leaned back in his chair and told me the HOA's position had collapsed. They were not just trying to fine me for something they had approved. They were trying to punish me for building the exact version their president had recommended. From there, the legal problems stacked up one after another. The first problem was written approval. The HOA guidelines did not require a magic phrase, a wax seal, or a ceremonial vote in front of the entire neighborhood. They required written approval from the architectural authority designated by the association. Richard had used the official account, responded to the official application, copied the management company, and never told me the approval was conditional. If he later wanted to claim he had no authority, then the HOA had a different problem. Their president had been issuing architectural decisions without proper authority, while homeowners relied on them. Either way, that was not my violation. The second problem was due process. The bylaws were very clear that before monetary fines could be imposed, the homeowner had to receive proper notice and an opportunity to be heard. I had received threats, bills, warnings, and certified letters, but never a real hearing before the fines began. They had charged me thousands of dollars first, and then acted as if I could beg for forgiveness later. My attorney said that kind of enforcement was exactly how HOAs exposed themselves to lawsuits, because even private associations had to follow their own governing documents. The third problem was selective enforcement. My wife and I spent one weekend walking the neighborhood and documenting every driveway gate, side gate, decorative fence, and exterior modification similar to ours. We did not trespass. We did not bother anyone. We took photos from the sidewalk and compared them to the architectural records we could access. Within 2 hours, we found 7 other gates that were taller than mine, wider than mine, or closer to the street than mine. 2 of them belonged to board members. 1 belonged to Richard's closest ally on the architectural committee. None of them had been fined. That changed the entire character of the case. If my gate was supposedly so harmful to community standards that it justified $12,000 in penalties, then why had the HOA ignored similar or worse gates for years? The answer was becoming obvious. The rule was not being applied fairly. It was being applied to me because Richard wanted to make me an example. And then there was the security footage. The clip was not long. It was not dramatic in the way movies make evidence dramatic. Richard was not screaming. He was not confessing to a crime. He was sitting in his golf cart near the curb, pointing at my gate and smiling while he told another board member that he was going to make an example out of me before other homeowners got ideas. But that one sentence mattered because it revealed motive. It showed that the enforcement was not neutral. It showed that Richard saw my gate not as a violation, but as a threat to his control. My attorney combined all of it into one demand letter. The letter laid out the timeline in a way Richard could not talk his way around. I submitted the application. Richard approved it in writing. I built the gate according to the approved design. The county confirmed there was no permit issue. The HOA later reversed position without a formal denial, without a hearing, without a proper vote, and without any evidence that the gate violated a specific written standard. Then they escalated the matter to $12,000 and threatened a lien against my home. The letter demanded 4 things. The HOA had to rescind the entire fine. They had to confirm in writing that the gate was approved and could remain. They had to remove any collection charges or legal fees from my account, and they had to reimburse the attorney fees I had already incurred because their improper enforcement forced me to hire counsel. There was one more sentence near the end that mattered most. If the HOA refused, my attorney was prepared to pursue claims for breach of governing documents, selective enforcement, bad faith conduct, and any damages connected to the attempted lien. Then the management company sent a message saying the board would review the matter at the next public meeting. Richard added one sentence underneath it, claiming he remained confident that the association had acted properly. That was the moment I knew he was not going to back down quietly. A reasonable person would have looked at the emails, the bylaws, the missing hearing, the county response, the other gates, and the video, then tried to settle the matter before the neighborhood saw everything. But Richard had spent years building an image of himself as the man who controlled the community. He could not admit in private that he had abused that control without risking his reputation in public. So he chose the worst possible option. He put my gate on the agenda for the next HOA meeting. The notice went out to every homeowner in the neighborhood. It described the issue as a discussion of unauthorized exterior modifications and enforcement action. It did not mention his approval email. It did not mention the missing hearing. It did not mention the county response. It did not mention that the $12,000 fine had been issued without a recorded board vote. Richard wanted the room to believe I was a rule breaker before I ever stood up. But by then, I had stopped being afraid of his title. My wife and I spent the next 2 nights preparing everything. We built a clean timeline with dates, documents, and screenshots. We printed the email chain in color. We highlighted the words approved as submitted. We saved the original metadata. We added the HOA bylaw sections requiring notice and hearing. We included the county permit response. We attached photos of similar gates that had never been fined. And at the very end, we placed the security video clip of Richard saying he would make an example out of me. I did not want revenge. I wanted the truth placed in a room where Richard could not delete it, deny it, or hide behind vague language. On the night of the meeting, I walked into the community center carrying a folder, a laptop, and the calmest anger I had ever felt in my life. Richard was already at the front of the room, smiling like he expected me to apologize. He had no idea that in less than an hour, the same residents he thought he controlled would be staring at his own words on a projector screen. The community center was more crowded than I had ever seen it. Usually, HOA meetings were half empty, with a few retired neighbors, a couple of board members, and someone complaining about landscaping costs. But that night, almost every chair was filled. People stood along the back wall. A few homeowners leaned in the hallway just outside the door. Word had spread that the board was going to discuss a $12,000 fine over a driveway gate, and curiosity had done what HOA newsletters never could. It brought the neighborhood together. Richard sat at the front table with the other board members, wearing the same confident expression he always wore when he believed the room belonged to him. He tapped his papers into a neat stack, adjusted the microphone, and opened the meeting by saying the board had a responsibility to preserve architectural standards for the good of the entire community. He did not say my name at first, but everyone knew exactly who he meant. Then he described my gate as an unauthorized modification. He said the board had been patient. He said the HOA had given me multiple chances to comply. He said enforcement action was never personal, but rules had to mean something. His voice was smooth, almost rehearsed, and if someone had walked into that room knowing nothing, they might have believed he was simply a responsible president dealing with a difficult homeowner. That was when my attorney stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten anyone. He simply introduced himself, stated that he represented me, and asked whether the board intended to discuss the fine before or after reviewing the written approval already issued by the HOA president. The room shifted immediately. People turned toward Richard. One board member looked down at his papers as if he was seeing them for the first time. Richard's smile tightened. He said the homeowner would have a chance to speak during the comment period, but the board would control the agenda. My attorney nodded and sat back down. He did not need to argue. Richard had just reminded everyone that he still thought he controlled the room. When my turn came, I walked to the front with my laptop and folder. My hands were steady, but I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Not because I was afraid of Richard anymore, but because I knew that once the first document appeared on that screen, there was no going back. I started with the application. The projector showed the architectural request form with my address, the gate measurements, the color, the placement diagram, and the date submitted. Then I showed the email thread. I enlarged the header so everyone could see Richard's official HOA address. I showed the attachments still connected to the message. Then I highlighted the reply, approved as submitted. No one spoke for a moment. Then a woman in the second row asked why the HOA had fined me if the president had approved it. Richard leaned toward the microphone and said the email had been preliminary, but before he could move on, I clicked to the next slide. It showed the meeting minutes from the architectural committee packet, the same packet the management company had sent me. My address was listed. My gate package was marked complete. The note said President Coleman had confirmed the design was acceptable. That was when the first board member asked Richard a question. Not me, Richard. He wanted to know where the formal denial was. Richard shuffled papers and said the matter had been handled through enforcement. My attorney then asked where the hearing notice was, because the bylaws required a hearing before fines could be imposed. Another board member looked toward the management company representative, who lowered her eyes and began searching through her folder. There was no hearing notice. I moved to the next slide. The county permit office response appeared on the screen. It confirmed there was no building permit violation connected to my address, and no county complaint regarding the gate. Then I showed the section of the bylaws requiring notice, hearing, and a recorded board decision before monetary fines could be charged. By that point, the room no longer felt like an HOA meeting. It felt like a deposition with an audience. Richard tried to interrupt again, saying the board was not obligated to let a homeowner turn a meeting into a legal presentation. But this time, the residents did not stay quiet. Someone in the back asked how many other fines had been issued without hearings. Another homeowner stood up and said she had been charged $800 for a mailbox color without ever being allowed to appeal. Then an older man near the aisle said Richard had threatened him over a fence repair after a storm, even though the damage had been reported to insurance. One voice became three. Three became six. The room that Richard had expected to control started filling with stories he had spent years keeping separate. Then I played the video. It was only a short clip from my driveway camera. The audio was not perfect, but it was clear enough. Richard's golf cart sat near the curb. Another board member sat beside him. Richard pointed toward my gate and said he was going to make an example out of me before anyone else got ideas. The effect was instant. The room went cold. No one laughed. No one whispered. Even the board members stopped moving. Richard stared at the screen with his mouth slightly open, as if he could not believe his own words had followed him into that room. For the first time since I had known him, he looked less like a president and more like a man who had forgotten that power leaves a paper trail. My attorney stood again and calmly summarized the issue. The HOA had approved the gate in writing, failed to provide a required hearing, imposed escalating fines without a recorded vote, threatened a lien based on a disputed and improperly created balance, and ignored evidence that similar gates had been allowed throughout the neighborhood. If the board continued enforcement, the matter would move beyond a meeting and into litigation. That was the point where Richard lost the room completely. A board member requested an immediate executive discussion. Another said the fine should be suspended pending legal review. The management company representative finally admitted that she could not locate any record of a hearing notice or formal vote authorizing the $12,000 balance. That sentence landed harder than anything I had said, because now it was not my word against Richard's. It was the HOA's own records against him. Richard tried one last time to regain control. He said emotions were running high and that everyone needed to remember how much work he had done for the community. But the room had changed. People were no longer looking at him with respect. They were looking at him like they were doing the math on every fine, every warning letter, every threat he had ever sent. By the end of that meeting, the board voted to pause all enforcement against my gate, send the matter to outside counsel, and review Richard's handling of architectural violations. It was not the final victory yet, but as I packed up my laptop, Richard would not look at me. The man who had smiled from his golf cart while threatening my home sat frozen behind the table, surrounded by neighbors who had finally seen the difference between leadership and control, and once they saw it, he could not make them unsee it. 3 weeks after that meeting, the HOA sent me a letter that was much shorter than all the threats they had mailed before. It said the $12,000 fine had been rescinded in full. It said all late fees, administrative charges, and collection costs connected to the gate had been removed from my account. It said the board had reviewed the architectural records and confirmed that my driveway gate had been approved as submitted. For the first time in months, I read an HOA letter without feeling my stomach tighten. The gate could stay, but the damage Richard had done did not disappear with one letter. By then, other homeowners were asking for their records too. People who had been too embarrassed or too intimidated to speak up started comparing notices, fines, and warning letters. The pattern was hard to ignore. Richard had not just been strict, he had been selective. He had used the rules like a weapon when he wanted control, and ignored them when the homeowner was a friend, a board ally, or someone he did not want to challenge. The board called a special meeting 2 weeks later. This time, Richard did not sit at the center of the table. He sat at the end, quiet, pale, and angry in the way people get when they realize the room no longer belongs to them. Residents demanded a review of every major fine issued during his term. They demanded written hearing procedures, recorded votes, and a rule that no single board member could approve, deny, or punish architectural requests alone. By the end of that meeting, Richard resigned as HOA president. He tried to call it a personal decision. He said he wanted to spend more time with family and step back from community stress. But everyone in that room knew what had really happened. He had not stepped down because he was tired. He stepped down because his own emails, his own missing records, and his own words on my security camera had finally caught up with him. The HOA also agreed to reimburse part of my attorney fees to avoid a lawsuit. It was not enough to make the whole experience worth it, but it was enough to prove they knew they had gone too far. The management company updated the enforcement process. Every fine now required a written notice, a hearing date, a recorded vote, and a clear appeal path for the homeowner. As for my gate, it is still there. Every morning when I back out of my driveway, I see it standing exactly where it was approved to stand. It is not flashy. It is not dramatic. To most people, it probably just looks like a simple gate at the end of a quiet suburban driveway. But to me, it means something else. It reminds me that property rights do not defend themselves. It reminds me that bullies with titles count on people being too scared, too busy, or too overwhelmed to read the rules. And it reminds me that the loudest person in the room is not always the one with the power. Richard thought he could bury me under fines because he ran the board. He forgot that paperwork lasts longer than intimidation. So if you ever find yourself facing an HOA, a board president, or anyone who thinks their position gives them the right to rewrite the truth, do not explode. Do not give them the angry reaction they are waiting for. Save the emails, read the bylaws, ask for the records, check the permits, build the timeline. Because I did not win by shouting louder than Richard Coleman. I won because I kept the proof. And if this story made you think about your own neighborhood, your own HOA, or a time someone tried to use rules unfairly against you, share your thoughts in the comments. Send this to someone who needs to hear it, save it for later, and subscribe for more stories about homeowners who protected their property the right way.